How's everybody doing today? It's a great day today. I look outside, the sun is shining, the birds are singing. It's a great day to talk about history. This is Dr. Winkler. This is the World War I class, and this is the 17th lecture. So it's getting pretty bad now. We're in the trenches. It took us a long time to get here, but we're going to be in here and trying to give you an explanation as to what it was like for the men who actually were involved in the fighting of the war. Remember, this is going to be this was the experience for tens of millions of men. I was talking a little bit about psychological comfort last time, how friends help and hurt, how men try to find anything they can for a little release, something to make their experience easier to handle. Tobacco, alcohol, sex. No sex at the front. So when you actually connect with women, it's going to have to be on leave or somewhere behind the lines. And I will come back and discuss that a little bit more as we proceed. But let me take a look just for a minute at letters. I remember reading an autobiography of a man who was in Vietnam. He said, I had two kinds of days in Vietnam. I had good days and bad days. The good days when I received a letter, the bad days when I did not. One of the few things you can do to escape what's happening, that horrible reality around you, is to get a letter from home. The letters can be silly, they can be trivial. A lot of times the men really like to receive letters from women, young girls, not necessarily somebody they're romantically involved with, because they thought it was so amusing that the girls said such interesting and sometimes silly things. The amount of letters that went back and forth on the Western Front, within millions. You see, the letter reminds you of another reality. The letter reminds you that there's something else back there. The reality isn't just around you. All this filth, this stink, this disgust, this fear, and this death. There's something else. If I can survive, there's something back there for me. And there's somebody who cares. There's one thing about being in agony. There's one thing about being in misery. You sit there and stew in it, and you suffer in it. Somebody cares. Somebody cared enough to do something for me. When you have mail call, when the mail actually does get to the front, when you get mail call, the guys are going. I mean, they don't usually run up as rapidly to get something to eat as they do to get a letter. Like guys, and then you wait in tension, for a few minutes as the man hands these out and he calls names. If you get a letter, you get two. Sometimes you get more than that. It's a very good experience. How about the men who don't get anything? That can be devastating. Nobody cares. There's nobody anywhere that cares what I'm going through. You don't care enough to put something on a piece of paper. Sometimes when the men do not believe they're going to be getting mail, or don't usually get mail, it's painful for them to go over to the mail call. So they'll actually try to distract themselves and hang back a bit. If their buddies are intuitive, and you see what's happening, these guys are, it doesn't do your day any good at all. In fact, it's a slap in the face. Oh, they'll come over with their letters sometimes. Say, oh, wait, I got this silly thing here. Let's laugh about it. Let's share it together. Now, that can be helpful. On the other hand, it still didn't come to you. The United States has been involved in a war in the Middle East, Iraq, for a long time. And I see this sometimes. I haven't seen this recently, actually. I see bumper stickers. We support our troops. Now, I realize that they're actually making a political statement. At least that's what I think they're doing. Which they're saying, oh, by the way, we support our troops. Actually, we support the government policy that has placed them in this situation. I think that's really what they're saying. If you support your troops, who are you writing to? How many are you writing to? How often do you write? That's how you support your troops. Another time I was walking to my car, I'm heading out to the parking lot. They're students, I guess, young people. They're standing around saying, oh, would you like to sign a letter going to some of our people who've been deployed? And you say something, I support you, kind of thing. And I remember looking at them and said, well, where's your addresses? Give me an address and I can write to somebody. A few phrases. That's something. No, anything is better than nothing. But how about make a difference? I've known about this for a long time. Yeah, I can read, going back when I was a kid. You read about what the guys are going through, and they want letters. They want you to care. Just that much. I've been a religious kid virtually my entire life. My parents took me out to religious services and sometimes a lot of meetings. And the number of meetings I've gone to over the decades, I tried to make an estimate one time. We're talking thousands of meetings, and sometimes you hear more than one oration in a meeting. How many orations have I heard in my life? In the thousands. How many do I remember? Of that, extremely few. Extremely few. Sometimes I can remember going to a meeting and say, this is a pretty good oration. I liked the presentation. I liked what was said. And then a half hour later, I have a very difficult time in actually telling you anything that was actually in that as far as content is concerned. Well, there's one thing that sits in my memory. Man, this is an old memory. I can't tell you the exact year, but it's during the early period of Vietnam. It's like 1965, something like that. Maybe it's 1966. I'm a young kid, and I went to a meeting, and this important religious leader was giving a speech. I didn't remember who it was for many years. I did some research and dug out and found out that I'm virtually positive the man giving this talk was S. Dilworth Young. This was in a large meeting. There was probably 1,000, maybe more people than that there. There was many hundreds of people there. He wasn't talking to me. He couldn't pick me out of that audience if he had to. S. Dilworth Young was an old World War I veteran. I have gone back, looked at his biography, and didn't really talk about so much what he did during the war. I don't think he was actually combat. I don't think he was actually up at the front. But he's in the American Army. He was deployed in France in World War I. And the point of his oration was this. Look, you think the guys are out there, and the government is taking care of them. They're taking care of all their needs, physical, psychological needs. He says, that's not true. What they need is you. Write them a letter. Tell them that you care. Say something to them. I remember in the course of his speech, he was talking about how they handled him during World War I, kind of the typical stories. They're somewhat amusing. The uniforms itched, the socks didn't fit. You'd stand in line, they'd hand you some slop and call it food. All these kind of complaints, very, very typical among the men of the First World War, virtually in every army. But he said, what you need is letters. Write to them. Well, Vietnam's going to go on for 10 more years. If my memory's correct, this is about 1965. And I've got my whole life, teenager, you're in school, you're in graduate school, college, university, that kind of thing. A lot of things can happen in that 10 years period. And I hate to tell you this, I never wrote anything to anybody. Sometimes I didn't pay attention. Sometimes people I knew were drafted, were deployed, and I didn't try to follow up on them. My hometown didn't ask around what was going on. Yeah, I got my own problems. Very unfortunately, I kept a diary at this time frame. Maybe I should say fortunately. I don't want to tell you if you keep diaries to reread them. Some people do. Sometimes I glance at them to say, "Oh my goodness, is that really me?" Couldn't read, couldn't write, couldn't spell, couldn't punctuate a sentence, and I'm keeping diaries. Now, my memory works a little bit better than perhaps the diaries would indicate. I'm taking university classes, I'm reading books. I do think about historical issues, but I don't put that in my diary. I put my diaries, I'm chasing women, what woman I'm interested in. Wow, like that's important? Well, it does say something about me. But I do want to say that there was more to me than that. However, I come across, and I'm a superficial person. What I care about is me. I do not care about other people. So even though men I knew went out to Vietnam, they suffered, and some of them died. And they come back and they continue to suffer. What did I do? What could I have done? I knew better. See, I mentioned I'm keeping a diary. I kept a diary. I still do. Your typical diary, got up, had breakfast. I don't write that down. Got up, to so much I think I slept, hung around with my wife, something like that, watched the news, and just typical regular things. Now, once in a while in your life, you do have something that's a fairly long entry when something's a little bit more important comes down the line. But I'm a writer. I'm not good at it. You see, comparing what I do with what an accomplished writer does, it's like throwing mud on a canvas and calling it art and comparing that to somebody who's an accomplished artist. I'm a writer. I just like doing it. I showed you one of the articles early on I've done. I've done, what, 40 books and articles now? Some are pretty good, I think. Some are kind of pretty average. But I'm a writer. I like to write. I like doing it. So why couldn't I do it when it mattered? Well, years later, decades later, I kind of got in a habit. I got one of my nephews went in the service. I didn't even hear about it until he was already out in basic training. Man, I wrote to him all the time. See, I had enough experience in my life to know what it's like to be away from home and to be alone and afraid. There's guys around you, but you still feel alone. It's hard to connect, kind of thing. Man, I was going to write to him. And I got other nephews going on missions. And I started numbering them. Why would I do that? Because when you number them, when I send it to them, it's numbered. Then they know in which sequence they arrived. I've been doing this for decades. Writing to individual persons, my nephews, I would number them when I was writing to them. Then it'd be another nephew and I'd number them. I really got in the habit when one of my sons was gone. Well, I wrote a whole lot. Well, he came back in 2002. So I started the numbering. I numbered the ones I sent to him. And I numbered the ones since then, starting over again. The last one I wrote was last weekend. My 973rd letter. What, am I sick? What I do is this. I'll take the letter. Excuse me, getting choked up here. I'll take a letter, and sometimes I'm writing to several people. When I was a soccer coach, and when these guys got up, went on missions, I was sending a letter to like a dozen guys at the same time. Same letter. I have kind of my own little philosophy. What I'm trying to do is amuse them. Do they need any advice from me? You're out in the military, you know how many people are giving you advice? One of my soccer players got put in jail. And I wrote to him, am I going to give him advice? I've never been in jail. How can I tell him how to get by? But I write the same letter. I change the names. I send them to them. And it is quite remarkable. Let me show you what they look like. They're the same length all the time. Do I have one here? I got the wrong notebook. Let's try the right notebook. Just happen to have one here. Well, I'm sure you can't see that, but you can see what is about 600 words. I fill up one page every day. Every time I should say. When I'm done writing, down the page, it's over. And I'll save whatever else I have in my mind or whatever for the next time. If you add the 973 that I've done since my son came home, and you add up the ones I sent to my son and the other missionaries, you know something? I have a rough estimate. I've written like 16, 17, 1,800 letters. And this is several decades' work. It's a hobby. Do you know how long it takes to write these things? I've timed myself. It averages about 20 minutes. What do you put in there? Silly things. Do you realize how much I can put in here just by the dumb things I do? Do you realize how much I can get in there by telling the students, not telling students, telling the people how I make a fool of myself in class? I mispronounce words, I do dumb things, and I exaggerate. But when things are going on in my life, I can tell them a story. I can exaggerate, and sometimes it's really quite accurate, about the foolish things in my life, the dumb things I do, and the dumb things I think. Do they care? You know, sometimes people will write back to me. They usually don't. I'm not asking them to write to me. It'd be nice to know that they were receiving them. But people will, sometimes they'll write back to me and say, hey, I enjoy your stuff. Sometimes people never respond and never say anything to me after they've come back. Sometimes people will go out of their way to thank me. Whenever you wrote to me, it made me feel better. Now, I have a good friend, a man I admire very much. He's African American. And he was 5 deployments in Iraq. He started out an enlisted man, and now he's a Marine Corps officer. He's got his PhD in history, bright guy, charismatic, good looking, charming man. My golly. One of my favorite jokes is when I grow up, I want to be just like him. I found out about one of these deployments. And so I put him on my list. I sent him the letters. And in doing so, he was down stationed, what's that Marine base in Southern California? 29 Palms? I've driven through there once, not a pleasant place. I'm from Utah. I've seen some pretty desolate places. Go down where the Marines are stationed, I go, whoa, this is a step above what I'm used to. He drove up with his wife. And he dropped in on me. And I was very pleased, nice guy, like to see him. And I said, why did you come up here? He said, well, to see you. You know, from California, you're up to see me. I said, well, yeah, you did see me. But what else did you come up for? He says, I came to see you. Thanking me for my silly efforts. This isn't something that's a joke. This is something that means something, at least to some people. You see, I missed the opportunity. One of the reasons why I didn't write to the guys in Vietnam is I felt foolish. I mean, I'd write letters to people and say, oh, you misspelled a word. Did I really? You're an idiot. You don't know how to punctuate a sentence. Yeah. See, some people would be grateful, and some people just want to use any excuse to make fun of you. I'm going to make mistakes, right? And I felt bad that I possibly would. Do you think I care now? If I make a mistake, I don't care. Heck, I got spell check. I'm going to misspell far fewer words. As much as I would like it to go away, it does not. For 10 years, I had the opportunity to write to men in Vietnam. And for 10 years, I did nothing. I still feel guilty about that. But remember, if you care for somebody, they're away from home. I don't care if it's a service. I don't care if it's in prison. I don't care what it is. Write to them. It'll make a difference. Now let's see what we got here. Esther with Young. Very impressed. Well, I'm kind of jumping around here a little bit, aren't I? Talking about sex here a little bit. We talk about venereal disease during the war. And it's a major problem because the men with venereal disease very often are taken out of the firing line. Men with venereal disease very often, of course, can't continue fighting. So this is a public health issue. This is very, very strong. And the military is quite concerned about it. Was it actually worse during the war than it was at other times? One study, remember, believe what studies are good, not all are accurate, but nonetheless, they said the venereal disease rates during the war were about the same as they were before the war. You look at the young men population, these are usually the guys getting venereal disease. You look at the young men population before the war and during the war, it's about the same. Of course, when you're in the trenches, you don't have access to women. So when you come out, then you get access. So can I say per time with women is probably a little bit higher because you see women less when you're in the military during the First World War? Usually say by the summer of 1917, about 150,000 British have come down with some kind of venereal disease. And however, 1 million Frenchmen also by the summer of 1917. 1 million. Remember, there's approximately 8 million men in the French army. Remember, however, not all of those. We usually say the teeth-to-tail ratio. In the First World War in the French army, it's about 1 to 1. For every 1 man you have in the trenches, you have 1 man supporting him. We say these guys in the trenches have a tendency to be the young men who are going to be more interested. See, the older men that are married, they can go home, they got wives. And chance of getting venereal disease from your wife is not very good. But chance of getting from a woman of the night, a loose woman, is much higher. I have read, it's for your consideration, I don't know if I believe it or not, I want to see more sources, but I have read that there were actually men who would go on leave and try to get a venereal disease. Try to get a venereal disease. Because once you got the venereal disease, you're out of action. It's a survival tactic. I want to see a source by a man who actually said, I did this on purpose. I went and got a venereal disease, so I got out of the trenches. It's not enough to say that men did this. I want to actually see a man who said he did this. Now, one of the reasons why I doubt this is not instantaneous. This isn't like you accidentally put a ball through your foot, that kind of thing. We'll come back to that in a minute. It takes a while for the symptoms to manifest themselves to a point where you become debilitated. If I were trying to get out of things, I would try to do something that was a little bit more immediate and also something that was not so long term. I know this is gross and I really don't know the history of venereal disease, but men who got gonorrhea sometimes could be cured. Very, very gross kind of operations. But if you got gonorrhea, and sometimes you can be cured, it usually left the men sterile. Syphilis is another issue entirely. Syphilis, they tried mercury and a bunch of things. Nothing really worked. There really is no cure. And it's very debilitating. Not only is it extremely painful, but the bacillus attacks your mind and you'll eventually go insane. There is no cure until the 1940s when penicillin becomes available. That's a good, 25 years after the First World War. in that length of time, of course, you can't sit in the trenches and go out to a prostitute in 1917 and say, oh, by the way, I just have to put up with this for 25 years, and then I'm going to get cured. See, by that time, your brain's already been eaten up. When the men are in government-sponsored rest homes, old soldiers' homes, and some of these men end up in old soldiers' homes simply because they're aged. However, there are men who spend their entire adult lives in these. They tend to be in two categories. They tend to be insane. We'll talk about it in a few minutes. They also tend to have venereal disease. It's really not until the 1990s, many years after the war is over, that all these men finally die off. That's an awful lot of hell for your entire life when there's nothing they can do for you. Now, we're not done with this topic entirely, because I'm going to come back and discuss this again. Not this exact issue, this similar issue when we talk about women in the war. But I want to point out how degrading war can be, and sometimes it's pretty awful. Okay. Another way you survive, let's go back up to alcohol. If you can get something in a flask when you're behind the lines and get yourself looped, or just enough to take the pain away, that's a pretty good thing. However, the armies are routinely issuing alcohol to their troops. The British get a daily rum ration. This actually goes back to the British Navy. When the men are out on ships, you can imagine how awful to be on small vessels and brutal situations and trouble with hygiene, and you're working literally from the time you get up to the time you go to bed. Then maybe a little escape, a little shot of rum will probably help you a little bit. Yeah. So actually, when this goes over to the military, when we have the army now heavily deployed in France, they give these guys a rum ration every day. It is very desirable. Men really want this. I remember reading a British soldier's account about this, and it's tough and it's cold and he's complaining about everything. Then the rum ration comes up, and boy, you scarf that right down. You want the effect as fast as you can. Once again, it's not enough really to inebriate you. I guess you got several, it would. It's really not enough to inebriate you. It is enough to maybe cut down your eye-hand coordination just a little bit, but it's enough to take the agony away. He said, since alcohol kind of has a burning effect when you drink it, he said it warmed him up a little bit, but it was the buzz, shall we say, that the men really wanted. Give you a chance to get out of it. The Germans issued a daily issue of brandy to their men. I believe this is true of the Austrian army as well. There's a brilliant, one of the best first-person accounts of the First World War I've ever read, by an Italian soldier, Emilio Lussu. I'm probably mispronouncing that. Emilio Lussu. Highly recommend this book to you. One of the most brilliant insights I've ever read. He's fighting the Austrians on the Italian front. Remember, they're up in the hills, up in the mountains, firing up and down at each other. A lot of brutal combat on both sides that accomplished, quite frankly, very little. He said that the Austrians were so big into drinking that you could actually smell the brandy wafting over from their trenches. And remember, it can be hundreds of yards away. They can smell them. Now, that's going to have to be a lot of brandy. So these guys are doing everything they can to try to relieve themselves of the pressure. One of the interesting things about Lussu was he didn't drink. But not only is he talking about, he can smell the stench of brandy coming over from the Austrian side, and he's an officer, so he has a little bit more insight. Everybody else in the Italian army is drinking as well, and they're drinking considerable amounts. Go talk to your commanding officer, and he's looped. You talk to the other people, and sometimes these guys are looped all the time. You see, this is one way you can survive, both in the Austrian army, German army, the Italian army, the British army. There was a standard issue in the French army that they got 1 liter of wine daily. A famous quote, World War I quote is, France fights on wine. Well, what's a liter? You know what a liter is, a little more than a quart. That is a liter. Why do I have a liter jar? I can't remember how many years ago I bought this thing. I think I originally had ginger ale in it, some kind of soda pop. The reason why I still have it is I have to drink a lot of water. It's good for my kidneys and other problems. And I want to make sure I get enough water, so it's easy to measure this. You fill it up, you got a liter. And of course, well, sometimes you chug half it, sometimes I chug more than that. I need to drink water. Well, this is a liter. And of course, that is the issue. Now, if you look at the amount of alcohol in wine, what is it? Is it 12%, 11%, 14%? Can I make a guess, therefore, that maybe what, this much? Maybe that's a little generous. This much of a shot of wine. This is actually this much, the alcohol content. The reason why it can't be much higher is that what causes the alcohol in the grape juice, the grapes, is bacteria. And after, sometimes they call this bacteria poop. If you're using a modern way of putting a bacteria into wine, it's usually yeast. So sometimes they call it yeast poop. Anyway, this yeast excrement will have enough alcohol in it that eventually it will kill themselves. All the bacteria will die. When it reaches that level, there will be no more alcoholic content. To get this at a higher level of alcohol, you have to distill it. Now, usually when you distill wine, you get brandy. Well, my point is this. The French like to eat wine. It's one of their national kind of things. There's good reason to drink wine because the bacteria kills itself and other bacteria there. So actually, if you drink wine, you're not going to get poisoned by bad water. Now, you probably need more than a liter per day. You probably would perhaps at least need 2. Depending on the situation, you might need more than that. But this is a way of being somewhat hygienic. And the guys are going to drink something that's not going to give them diarrhea or make them sick. Is this enough to give you a loop? Is this enough to give you a little height? Probably if you drink it fast enough, it is. It will give you a chance to take the edge off some of the problems which you have. The Blighty one. When the British were in the British Army had been deployed in numerous places around the world, small units relative to what they're going to have on the Western Front. Of course, there are British units in Africa, numerous places. There are British units in Asia, numerous places. We say most of the men in the British Army that are deployed outside of Britain is actually in India. And of course, some of these are your hiring local people to your fighting. But the British Army's there, and of course, you do have to try to be able to communicate a little bit. Know at least enough to give orders to the local Indian troops. So I'm sure the Indians start picking up English, a very valuable language to have. But the British also start picking up a few terms that come from Hindi, I believe it is. There are numerous languages spoken in India, I'm sure you know that. And one of these is called, it's Blighty. Now, this is obviously an anglicized version of a Hindu term. I'm sure if you walked up to a Hindu and said Blighty, he'd probably look at you, what are you talking about? In any event, it is, shall we say, a term that derives from the army being in India. And it's Blighty means home. Can we say the most desirable place to be if you're out in the trenches is home? You get out of everything, get out of the muck, dirt, the filth, the disease. The Blighty one is a wound. Most desirable thing you have. Not enough to maim you, not enough to debilitate you, but enough to get you out of the firing line. So they send you home. You go home to the hospital. If it's bad enough, you don't get sent back again. Just get you out. The wound that sends you home. In German, it's the Heimatschuss. Heimat means home. Shot means Schuss means shot. It's a shot that sends you home. It's their version of the Blighty one. My French is terrible. Une fine blessure. It's a fine shot. A fine wound. I said that wrong. A fine wound. You see, that sends you home as well. It's not just the British who are talking in this direction. They're talking the Germans, the French. I haven't found out what it is in Russian or Italian, but I would imagine, believe very strongly nonetheless, that there is something very similar in other countries, in other languages, for the same kind of idea. During the Second World War, among the Americans, it was called the $1 million wound. You got the wound, it sends you home. I was reading some first-person accounts about the Battle of Bulge in December 1944. And this one man's talking about his friend getting hit. And of course, it's terrible experience. The guy's hurt and he's wounded. And the guy's trying to give him a cigarette, whatever. He's trying to comfort him. What can you say to a man who's been hurt to try to comfort him? And he came up to this guy and he said, look, I know you're hurt now, and I know it's pretty awful, but you get to go home. That's the $1 million wound. You get out of this. You can go home. I see accounts of this showing up all over in first-person accounts of the First World War. There was one man who was in the trenches. You got to be very careful with a bayonet, as you well know. I mean, the very long blade, and of course, you want to hold them up like this, so you're not going to jab anybody near you. But of course, there are times when the guys have to be up on firing lines, just men below them. If you're going out more, you have to have men behind you. So there can be men above you, and you have a bayonet sticking up. Any event, this man's account, the lieutenant, an officer, accidentally stabbed him in the leg with a bayonet. Now this is rare. Officers don't usually do this. But the officer apologized to the man. See, I'm sorry. And the man, this Englishman, came back and said, oh, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. You just got me out of it, at least for a while. One of the more extreme cases, one of the more extreme accounts, reading about a man who was shot. He shot kind of up here, children's chest, right through here. And how horrific would that experience be? He's shot. The bullet went completely through him. And before he passes out from the pain and the loss of blood, he keeps repeating to himself, thank God, thank God, thank God. With all the pain, at least he'd get out of it. Does that give you indication how awful it was? Sure does to me. Another experience, a U.S. military account. First World War again. Guy's wounded, he's back in an aid station. Of course, the officers come around, give you a pat on the back. Yeah, you're a really good soldier. You're really hanging in there for your country, for your unit. And one of the officers asked this wounded man if you wanted to go back. Go back to the front. And the man said, may God forgive me for the lie I told. I said I wanted to go back when I didn't. Obviously, did not want to go back at all. I've been introducing some British songs to you. I think they help us illustrate to a certain extent what the men are thinking. British songs. I won't sing it for you because I can't sing. But talking about the men who have been wounded. I don't want to get well. I'm glad they shot me in the firing line. When I was confused last time, I showed you a song from Oh, What a Lovely War. It's a very good song. I'm not going to pull up again because I don't want to waste your time twice. But this is some of the refrains from it. I don't want to go in the trenches no more. Oh my, I don't want to die. I want to go home. There are severe risks that men take when they're in the battlefield. And you don't know if you're attacking a position, if it's going to be dangerous, or you're going to get killed, or there's going to be a cakewalk, you're going to get lucky. Remember reading a Frenchman's account, it's been translated into English, when he's talking to the men during the, before an attack. And what you see happening is, he said that men were crying. They haven't been under fire yet. They were saying things like, I don't want to die. Well, if you rush a German machine gun, you might have a very big problem in dying. You know your chances are very good of being killed. Now, what do you do before an attack takes place? How can you get out of it? Before there's an attack, usually there's some warning. If you're shelling enemy position for days, you have a pretty good idea you're going to go over when the shelling stops. And sometimes it's a few hours. Sometimes they just simply give you a briefing. Oh, by the way, we are going to go over 5 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning. Attacks in the morning were very common because then you got all day to figure it out. So what do? The guys go to the doctor and try to convince the doctor that they have some kind of illness, some kind of condition that will keep them out of the firing line. You see, they're trying to figure out a way of surviving. They're trying to figure out a way of not being killed. It's very common. Another World War I song. If you want to find the old battalion, I've seen them, I've seen them. If you want to find the old battalion, I've seen them hanging on the old barbed wire. This is what I had up for you at the beginning of the lecture. I didn't explain this. There are numerous cases, numerous photographs you can see of men hanging on the barbed wire. If you're hanging on the barbed wire, you're dead. In this case, these are German soldiers. You can tell by the helmet. It's probably, they're trying to reach probably an allied position, either British or French. And this is as far as they got before they got hung up on the wire. Sometimes when men are hit by shell fire, they're blown to smithereens. Sometimes body parts will be dangling on the barbed wire. Sometimes there'll be body parts hanging from trees because you're literally blown in such a long distance. See if I can find that for you. There are several versions of this. They're fairly long. Here's a short one from Oh, What a Lovely War. Once again, I apologize in advance for the sound quality, but maybe you get an idea of the song. Oh,
My name is Henry Morgan. My life is just like
yours.
yours. Except for what?
Thank you.
The old battalion, we know where they are. We know where they are. We know where they are. If you want the old battalion, we know where they are. They're hanging on the old barbed wire. We sing them, we sing them, hanging on the old barbed wire. We sing them, hanging on the old barbed wire. We sing them, hanging on the old barbed wire. We sing them, hanging on the old barbed wire. We sing them, hanging on the old barbed wire.
While I'm into this, let me show you another song. Not exactly hanging on the old barbed wire, but it's songs that the British sung about their experience, about how awful it is. Bombed Last Night, also from Oh, what a lovely war.
Bombed last night and bombed the night before. Gonna be bombed tonight if we never get bombed anymore. When we're bombed, we're scared as we can be. God stop the bombing men from higher Germany. They're over us, they're over us. One shell over just the four of us. Thank your lucky stars there are no more of us, 'cause one of us could fill it all alone. Gas last night and gas the night before. Gonna get gas tonight if we never get gas anymore. When we're gassed, we're sick as we can be. 'Cause phosgene and mustard gas is much too much for me. They're warning us, they're warning us. One respirator for the four of us. Thank your lucky stars the three of us can run, so one of us can use it all alone.
I don't want to look past the filth, the absolute filth that these men have to live in. There is excrement around. Yes, of course, they have latrines. So interesting to me as we read so many of these accounts. All these men know about bathroom problems because everybody's involved there. You got thousands of men sitting around, but you see very few accounts about the latrines. Now, going back and looking at snipers, of course, the snipers know where the latrines are. In fact, when you usually see schemas at the front, you see various places in your machine gun positions, but they really don't even bother putting this on a lot of these maps of the front where the latrines were. Well, when a man goes into the latrine, the flies go around. Snipers would watch for this. Remember, you're looking through a scope, so you can see pretty good a long distance. And when you see, look at the latrine and see some flies go up, you send a bullet in, because you know there's a man in there. Even before you get to the trenches, if you're moving up, zigzag trenches up at nighttime, bringing up equipment, or you're bringing up reinforcements, or you're replacing people at the front, the place stinks. It's filthy. It stinks from gas. It stinks from dead bodies. But a big problem that everybody has to face is lice, is body lice. Now, you live in the ground around people, and it doesn't have to be people there at all, around all this filth, this vermin. Talk more about the vermin in a minute. You're going to have body lice. I mean, everybody does. The British call the body lice cooties. Actually, going over to cooties here, the French call body lice toto. The Germans call body lice die Läuse. Anyway, everybody's got a name for it. Cooties, body lice. Well, you get body lice simply from the filthy condition. Now, if you want to make a comparison between the First and the Second World War, this one works fairly well. Because at least the Americans, the Allies during the Second World War, had DDT, a powerful insecticide. And if you spray that on you or wipe it all over your place, there's a pretty good chance that you can hold down the insect population. Now, we didn't know in the 1940s, but it's developed, we found out later in the 1960s, that using DDT excessively, it damaged the environment and actually can damage the human being if you're around it too much. But in the 1940s, they don't know this. And it holds down the insect population on your body. So the situation is not as bad in the Second World War as in the First. First World War, well, about all you can do is wash, but you're in the trenches, how do you wash? And you're up there days. If you're in battle, you can be up there for weeks. Now, sometimes, or months even, sometimes you do have a chance to rotate back. Under intense time frames, you actually might have to vary this somewhat. The Germans, at least early on, were trying to have 4 days in the trenches, 4 days back, give you a chance to survive, control yourself mentally, and wash the bugs off of you. After a while, the Germans needed their men at the front, so the rotation was like 4 days up and 2 days back. That's pretty bad, but that's ideal in a combat situation. You can be up there for a very lengthy period of time. You're going to get body lice. Or when you come back, one of the first things they do is get you in a shower, get you some good old soap. Some guys complain the soap was pretty harsh, kind of take off a level of skin as well. Sometimes you go the guys through the shower so fast they don't really have much of a chance to lather up. But, and of course, at that time frame, you might want to try to get the lice out of your uniform. A lot of times it didn't work very well because you got too many men, you're working too fast. So that didn't really control it. If you're at the front, you have a big problem on your hands. Little suckers, why do they like you so much? Because you taste good. The little suckers, they drink your blood. Now, how unpleasant is that? You can be doing much anything, and then somebody decides they're going to have a nice meal on you. They can get you anywhere. If they get you in places where you can reach, it'd be kind of nice. You can pull them off or try to get a loud call on them, maybe kill them. When they hit you in the middle of the back, what do you do? To keep yourself from literally being eaten alive, you really do have to clean yourself. Because I don't know how long it takes for them to lay their eggs and have another generation. But if you get several generations of these on you, you've got a very big problem indeed. Obviously, this is pretty gross. I've always hated insects. I always hated knowing about insects. I always hate looking at insects. How do you control this? Well, you see men delousing themselves. So you can get some photographs of that. You see, this is very common. These are German soldiers. They don't usually show men taking their trousers off because that's a little obscene. So you generally see men that are delousing themselves by pulling their shirts off. Now, you're not showing a candle here or a small flame. Very commonly, what these men will do, you pull these little buggies off you and you drop them in the flame. Now, you can squish them with your hands, but actually lice have a kind of a heavy shell on them. So it takes a little bit more effort. It's just easier to drop them in a flame. They like to live in the seams. They're very clever. It's warmer in there. They want to be next to your body. They live in the seams and they lay their eggs in the seams. So you can't just pull them off the center of your shirt or your trousers. You have to get on the seams. Going back to the flame, get a candle, get a small flame of any kind. And if you're careful, you can hold up the seam of this and it will kill the lice and kill, at least importantly, kill the eggs without actually burning the fabric. But you have to do this over and over again. Once again, I'll talk about the lack of sleep in a little while. One of the reasons why a lot of men have a lack of sleep is that they're being eaten by these suckers. Sometimes they just have to get up and do something. So this is irritation. It also leads to typhus. Typhus can kill you. Not all forms of typhus are lethal. But actually, if you get typhus, you actually are sick enough usually to be taken out of the front, where you can at least get a decent shower. And you can get a decent shower and you get a bed and some decent food for a few days. As you're recovering, you have high temperatures. I remember reading about one of these first-person accounts again. We're in the trenches, and one of the men had found out that one of his friends had been taken back out of the front because he had typhus. But some of his gear got left there, probably the mat he was sleeping on. So this guy took his shirt off, jumped in the mat, rolled around all over the place, hoping that he would get typhus as well, just to get out of it. Hygiene is a problem. I've already mentioned that. Terrible stench, just dead bodies everywhere. Of course, dead bodies are terribly unhygienic. You get diseases and all kinds of things from them. What happened in the war? You start out in the war and you have shell fire. Of course, early in the war, you have bomb craters. So how are you going to bury the guys? They die there. Once again, it's very dangerous to go out in no man's land or even nearby your trenches and drag somebody off so they can give them a decent burial. That does happen. But a lot of times what you do is there's a shell hole there and try to just grab a shovel and just, they're already in a hole, so you just kind of cover them up. Sometimes when these bodies have been found after the war, there was a little bit of deference paid to them when they laid them out to die. Sometimes they would fold the corpses, they'd fold their arms across their chest or across their middle to show them some kind of deference, I guess. So they're out there by the hundreds of thousands, literally. And then during the course of the war, you're readjusting the trench lines. See, a lot of these men die early in the war. They're buried, but the trench lines become larger. You move them around, you go forward, you go back a little bit. It's very common for these men as they're digging to run into a corpse. These men state that the smell of a human corpse, particularly it's been decomposed for a number of months, can be literally horrific. They say even though rats, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, rats stink horrifically. But some of the men said a human corpse will stink something like 100 times as worse as a rat. I'm from Tooele. When I was a kid, they had the city dump was outside the city. We were kind of roustabouts. They had rats all over out there, and we would go get our guns, shotguns, 22s, and go out and start blasting rats. You see what you do at nighttime, you drive up, and you can hear them out there. They're going all through the garbage. And you wait to give them a chance to congregate, and then you turn the lights, your headlights on of your car, or you get a spotlight so you can get at them a little bit better. And so the lights come on, bam, 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 you start shooting like crazy. Yeah, I got a few rats with a shotgun. And, you know, it didn't do the rat any good, by the way. So I've done this kind of thing. However, can you imagine the problems you could possibly have? Occasionally, somebody would get shot out there shooting at the rats. So the city decided they were going to poison the rats. So they put some poison out there. When that happened, the rats, of course, left the city dump and they came into town. One of the rats came into our yard. Now, we had cats. We always had cats. We think the cats might have trapped it in the top of the garage. I'm not sure of that. Maybe the rat just was sick anyway, went up there and died. But that rat stunk. And you multiply that by 100 times, give you an idea of how horrific it was to smell the corpse of a dead man. It really got gross. We have these accounts. Sometimes you're digging along, you hit a corpse. Well, you can dig it out or whatever. It takes a little bit more time. What very often you find out is a bone, a leg bone, arm bone, most likely, that's protruding from the side of the trench. And some men use these. I mean, psychologically, somehow these people get inured to that kind of thing. Somehow they get used to it to the point where it's not nearly as painful. So you'd actually take and hang a hat on it, sometimes a pail of water or something, on a human bone sticking out from the side of a trench. Sometimes a human skull. Rats. Rats live all over the fields of Europe. One thing that, I shouldn't say this amuses me in any real sense, but I read about rats. You think for every rat you'd have out there, you'd have mice. However, I don't read about the mice. I read about rats. Maybe the rats beat up the mice and threw them out. Maybe mice are too busy living in your house to go out in the fields. The rat that was largely popular in Europe 100 years ago was the ferocious brown rat. Now, the black rat had been in Europe before for a few centuries. When the brown rat came in, he beats up the black rat, throws him out of town. Rats are very prolific. You can have a litter of rats in a matter of a few months. The baby rats will be having litters of their own. And the rats have so many things to live on. There's literally all kinds of garbage out there, and including human bodies. The rats get so, and remember, these are ferocious animals. They get so brazen that a lot of times the men are trying to sleep, the rats will run over them. And you have to be very careful. If you have anything laying out like food or something, the rats will come in when you're not looking, essentially, when you're asleep, or when the lights are off, and come in and eat the rats and eat the food. It's a little bit like lice. Unless you want to get eaten alive, you've got to do something to control the lice on your body. The same thing with rats. They are such a problem. And yes, they do bite people. They are so much of a problem, you got to kill them. Well, how do you kill them? Well, you got weapons. You got rifles. You can certainly shoot them. Well, it's kind of dangerous if these things are running around the trench and you got your high-powered rifle here. If you hit him, he's dead. But it's very, very dangerous. You can try to stick them with the bayonet, but they're quite agile. They'll run around. And so there's traps set for them. Sometimes the guys will do this. Of course, you hear the rats are all over the place. And they throw a little bread or something in the middle of a room and turn the lights off and wait. The best account I've seen of this, going back to Remarque, remember, it is actually, and All Quiet on the Western Front, it's a novel. But a lot of things he says is actually authentic. He has a very good account of this. They have the rats are there. Then somebody turns the lights on, all the rats are there. And this gives you opportunity to grab a board and whack them up. You can see, and these men are, these Italians? I think they're Italians. But they're quite pleased with having caught them. These happen to be Germans. In various ways, you trap or you kill them. But you have to try to control them. You can see these rats are not exactly hurting for food. Sometimes the rats would so gorge themselves on human flesh that they got so fat it was hard for them to get away. And these were the kinds of rats that would be easier to club to death or kill in other ways. The rats carry disease, you bet they do. Problems as well. Now the insects. I talked about lice, but there's a lot of other insects you're going to see. Ticks, mites. And these things carry disease. Remember, lice tends to carry typhus, can carry other things as well. The ticks, the mites, from them you largely get scabies. Sometimes you get what they call the 7-year itch, where actually some insects will get inside of your skin and they'll lay eggs there. Of course, you want to make sure you can get them out. If you don't get out, and sometimes the itch, sometimes these little suckers underneath your skin will actually come out. And at that point, when that happens, of course, you get the 7-year itch. And man, you are digging them out. Fleas bite you. And once again, fleas suck your blood, and they do carry disease. And I already mentioned lice. The Germans call them die Läuse, and the French call them, however you pronounce that, toto. The Germans, remember, they have an advanced chemical industry, and what they have is very good. Well, if you could somehow cleanse the trenches, get rid of the rats, get rid of the insects, it would be a lot more hygienic, and the men, of course, would survive better, have less problems with men being sick. During the First World War, the German chemical industry developed Zyklon B. It's extremely powerful poison. 1/3 of an ounce is enough to kill a human being. Now, if you're going to, shall we say, cleanse a trench, you don't want the guys there because you can kill them. It takes a while for this to dissipate. So if you're taking this and spraying this around, you can't use the trench for a certain length of time. You bring guys back too soon, it can kill them. Now, it wasn't terribly successful under a situation in a trench, though it was tried. Later on, this is going to be the preferred poison during the Holocaust, where the Germans are going to use Zyklon B in gas chambers. Remember, it's enclosed there to kill human beings, to kill Jews and other what the Nazis considered to be undesirable. Well, the situation is pretty bad on your health-wise. Let's take a look at these. Trench foot. Trench foot, and depends which book you want to read. Sometimes they say it is frostbite. You see, if you're standing in trenches for a lengthy period of time, and there's a lot of water in the bottom of the trenches, particularly when it's cold in the wintertime, there's a chance that circulation is going to get cut back, and therefore you can get frostbite or rot. Your skin will actually rot. If you're careful, if you try to stand out of the water, if you change your socks often, of course it's very difficult sometimes to get a good, clean, dry pair of socks. You can help the situation somewhat. In the British Army, yeah, you see what we have here. I probably should have done this here. Actually, sometimes more than once a day, the officers come by and inspect your feet. They come by and inspect your feet and actually say, well, by the way, you need to do this and this to take care of yourself better. Sometimes if you took some kind of fat and rubbed that on your feet, it had a tendency to keep the water from getting into your feet as bad. So there were certain ways that you could help this. But this is a problem that never really goes away. You can see these gentlemen over here when you're standing in water. This can be a very, very big problem. Well, I wanted patties and got patties. See, this is what happens to you when you can't spell. Let's try it again. I'll try with you this time. Try it again. 2 T's, only off by 1. During the First World War, this is very common for the British, the Americans, and the French. They have what they call patties. You see, there's barbed wire all over. There's all kinds of things that are going to tear your pants to shreds. And usually your knee on down is where your pants are going to get torn up. Well, you can get a needle and thread and try to sew them up. Not terribly efficient. And just simply bringing up new trousers all the time is costly and it's time consuming as well. So the French, the British, the Americans, Canadians, they have what they call patties. Patties is just a wool cloth that you wrap. You see it right here, it's a wrap. And you wrap, it's a man standing in the mud, you wrap this around your leg. This is efficient, but however, how do you keep that up? These are not elastic. The only way you can keep them up is by having a lot of tension on the cloth itself. So you have to wrap them quite tightly, and then you have on top of that, you have a pin or something to hold it on. But see what that does is it slows the circulation to your feet. And you have slowed circulation to your feet, then you are much more likely to have problems with trench foot. The Germans are actually using boots. How about boots? They have the same problem, obviously. But you see, can we look at that? You can see that the German boot is obviously made out of leather, and it goes so far up your calf. Let's see if I can get a picture of somebody wearing one of these things to show how high up they go. Well, maybe I just simply don't have it here. Okay, anyway, it goes part way up your calf. So leather, of course, is pretty good in resisting when you happen to be scratched by wire. And of course, the pants would be tucked in the boot. So you don't have to have the same situation. So the Germans using boots while the Allies using puttees. Now, the boot has to fit pretty tight or it's going to come off, particularly in mud. But on the other hand, we do think that there would largely be more circulation among, shall we say, with German feet than there probably was with Allied feet. So you'd have more trouble with trench foot, trench mouth, gum disease. It really comes from the filthy situation. Of course, they want the men to brush their teeth. How about trench mouth? Yeah, pretty stinking gross. Let's see if I can get it from World War I. Actual photographs taken the time frame. Well, all right. It's just something that was so common that, and of course, gum disease predates the war quite a bit. But you're going to have more problem during a wartime situation because simply of the major problems we're going to see with hygiene. Now, I believe I'm running low on time. Let's see how much time I've got left. Well, not much. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to give you just a very brief introduction. Well, that was helpful. Very brief introduction to our next point of discussion here. And we're going to talk about the mentality now, what happens to men mentally when they're in the First World War. And I'm going to make an argument about religion. So I'll be talking about religion, how this influences the men's belief system, and the supposition some people have, there's no such thing as an atheist in the foxhole. I will address that. I'll get into a little more detail and talk about how the men thought religiously during the war. And then I'm going to talk about reality, leave time, and then, of course, we have a little ways to go yet in talking about their experience. Well, in the meantime, we are out of time. I appreciate all you very much, and I hope you're going to enjoy your day. Remember, birds, flowers are going to be out there, and we're going to have a great time. I'll see you next time.